Bismillah, the next section, we're talking about some of the conditions of validity. Imam al-Buhuti, he says, وَشُرِطَ لَهُ وَلِغُسْلٍ نِيَّةٌ وَطَهُورِيَّةُ مَاءٍ وَإِبَاحَتُهُ وَإِزَالَةُ مَا يَمْنَعُ وُصُولَهُ وَانْقِطَاءُ مُوجِبٍ. Here in this line, Imam al-Buhuti says the following are the conditions, these are conditions of validity for wudu, as well as ghusl. And this also includes tayammum, if the tayammum is done to remove impurity from the body. And this is be the obligatory or recommended, meaning the obligatory wudu, obligatory ghusl, recommended wudu, recommended ghusl. So the first thing is intention, a niyyah, which is should be well known by everyone based on the hadith of إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ, that verily actions are by their intentions. It's a very famous hadith, hadith that most of the hadith scholars begin with in their collections of hadith, like Imam al-Nawawi, etc. Basically, this hadith insinuates that there is no reward for a deed without an intention. So there are exceptions to this rule, very few exceptions to this rule. And one example is a non-Muslim woman who's required to make a ghusl, whether that's due to her menstrual cycle, postpartum bleeding, or being in a major state of ritual impurity, which would be like janaba, right, sexual impurity. And the reason that she would have to make the ghusl is if she needed to prepare herself or her spouse to be intimate. That is a requirement, that before they are intimate, that she has performed the ghusl. And because she's non-Muslim, she doesn't have the prerequisite of Islam to produce the intention required here as a prerequisite of the ghusl. And because of that, she's excused from this prerequisite. Similar would be the deceased. You're going to make the ghusl for them. They can't make it, obviously. So the person that is washing them has to make the intention on their behalf. If the intention, and basically the intention is either to perform prayer or something like prayer, or to eliminate the state of impurity. And if this intention, the intention here, if it doesn't meet these basic standards, either this or that, it will not be valid. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the next section. Another condition of both wudu and ghusl is purifying water. The water has to be purifying, not pure water. The difference between tahur and tahir. We've discussed that in a previous lesson in great detail. So the water must be tahur to use it for a ritual purification. It also must be permissible. That's the next condition. This is based on the hadith, whoever does an act which has not been ordered by us will be rejected. It's collected by Imam Ahmad and Muslim. And so stolen, forcefully taken, or misappropriated water is not valid. You can't use it to make wudu. The wudu would be invalid. The ghusl would be invalid if you use stolen water, forcefully taken water, or misappropriated. An example of misappropriated, obviously stolen water, we get that. Misappropriated would be like using water that has been endowed for drinking purposes only. And you may know that there's at times these water fountains that are put out by people for public use and marked for drinking. The endowment is specified for drinking only, which means it's not permissible to use that water to make wudu. And because it's impermissible, it is invalid. And that's typically what we understand in our madhab, is that something that's impermissible, it insinuates the lack of validity, that it is been voided. Okay, it has been ruined by that impermissibility. These conditions, they also include the removal of whatever prevents it, meaning preventing the water from contact with the limbs, either during wudu or contacting the body during ghusl. And this includes things like dough, oil, wax, thick substances, maybe like paint, that would prevent the water from getting to the skin, and it would be required that those things be removed, obviously. There may be some exceptions we'll get to later on. Also, cessation of what obligates it, meaning whatever has obliged you to make wudu or ghusl has to have come to an end, because those are the things which nullify your state of purity or purification. And therefore, if they are ongoing while you are trying to purify yourself, they are just invalidating that state of purity. So like trying to make a ghusl while you're still experiencing your menstrual cycle, you're still going through postpartum bleeding, you're still urinating, passing wind, all of that stuff has to come to an end before you can begin to try and eliminate that hadith. You can't eliminate the hadith while it is ongoing. There are some other conditions, just to be thorough, other conditions which are not mentioned by Imam al-Bahuti here. Those include being of sound mind, as opposed to having a lack of your mental capacity or faculty. Being discerning, which is the age of 7 and above. Being Muslim, basically before puberty, 7 and above before puberty. Being Muslim, with the exceptions that I mentioned. An entrance of the time for someone with a perpetual hadith. Perpetual hadith is like incontinence, when a person has no control over their bladder, and urination is irregular, frequent and irregular. It just happens. They have no control over it. Their additional intention is that the time has to have come in, and then there's some additional requirements of that type of person we'll discuss later. Also, lastly, is istinja and istijmar for those required to do so. This is a condition or prerequisite before wudu or ghusl are made.